He will share his experience in open source, and he will tell how open source has changed his life. And maybe we will get more hands as people who answer the question, do you contribute to, after this awesome talk. Okay, let's begin.
That's good. That's the hope.
Work in progress.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Good morning. I'm really happy to be here. I've given this talk a couple times in different places, but this one is slightly different based on the audience, and just because things have changed slightly since I last gave this talk. So, as Nastya said, the whole point of this talk is multifaceted. First, I want to kind of tell you what I've done in open source, how it's kind of shaped my life. Then I will tell you what I've learned, then I'll tell you how you can get into it. And just like a few people raised their hands, I've successfully contributed to Swift earlier in the year, and I'll tell you what I did and how you can go about doing it pretty much immediately after this talk, and that it's not that complicated. You just need to stay awake for a few hours at night for about a week straight to make sure you can reach the right people to get everything merged in properly. So, I have to dance? Oh, this thing might not be on. All right, it's fine. So, we can't really have a conversation about open source without a basic definition. I have a feeling everyone here knows what open source software is. But just in case you don't, it's software with source code that anyone can inspect, modify, and enhance, and can make money off of for free without paying any royalties, which is the best part. So I'm sure, a show of hands, how many of you have open source software in any of your projects? Only 3, 4 people use open source software in their apps? Okay, that's what I thought. Otherwise, we have to have a completely different discussion right now about why you should. All right, that's good. So next, we need to have a conversation about the different types of open source software. So there's free as in free beer, and free as in liberty. So, show of hands, when I talk about open source software that is free to enhance and modify, is it beer or is it liberty? So let's start with beer. 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, 4. That's it? 4 people think it's beer. Okay. And how many of you think it's liberty? Everyone else? And how many of you have no opinion at all? Okay. 1. Perfect. Okay. Well, if you're in the second group of people, you're right. It's free as in liberty. That's because in the English language, free means бесплатно and free means свободно. So in this case, we're talking about liberty because you have the liberty to do whatever you want and no one can tell you not to do it. An example of software that's free as in free beer is like Adobe Acrobat, which is absolutely free software, but it's a black box. You can't actually take a look inside the SDK. So anything by Adobe or Macromedia or all those old companies, that's free as in free beer software. So what I'm here to talk to you about is free as in liberty. So to prove to you, I kind of know what I'm talking about. I'll give you a little bit of my history, at least with respect to iOS development. So I distribute a lot of my software through CocoaPods and Carthage and Swift Package Manager, but CocoaPods actually keeps statistics on this. So as of last night, I reached the 2 million download mark. So my software has been downloaded at least 2 million times through the CocoaPods Dependency Manager. Thank you. On these personal projects across this and some other projects I have about 700-800 stars. I've contributed to Swift 3.1. I've contributed to the source compatibility suite. I have a library that I've built that Apple accepted into their CI workflow, so whenever they run any new regression tests, one of my apps gets tested all the time. Sorry, one of my libraries. And I also wrote a little script called getFame that can kind of keep track of this information because it became interesting to see how my libraries are progressing, and it's a Swift CLI that's available for free on GitHub. And if you like the theme as well, it's called Cognac, and that's available for every single UI editor you can imagine, including the terminal. And the entire talk's already online as well, and everything is hot linked, so you can click on everything throughout the talk if you're interested. And the last point I want to make is that I don't have a degree in computer science. I've actually only taken 1 computer science class in my entire life. It was in Java. It was miserable. So everything that I've done in my life, the fact that I'm here is all self-taught. And the whole purpose of me saying that is to tell you that even if you don't know how to program or you're just an enthusiast or hobbyist, if you, like everything else in life, if you put enough time and passion into it, you can succeed. And that's exactly what I think my proof of me standing on the other side of the world talking to you about this today, I think is proof that that's true. So let's go into the first open source project. Sorry, before we do that, let's talk about the 4 different types of open source projects that exist. And this slide is kind of paraphrased from Felix Krause's talk on the 4 stages of open source projects. He gave this talk in Try Swift about a year and a half ago. So there are 4 projects. So the first type of project is one that has absolutely no adoption. So it's pretty much maybe you take a class online or you just write some code in some language you don't know. You just want to back it up for free online. You put it on GitHub or GitLab or somewhere else. And no one ever looks at it. It just kind of sits there to die. So that's a project with no adoption. And the majority of the projects fall under this category. And then there's a project with adoption. And that could be literally one friend that looks into your project, leaves an issue or a pull request, or actually contributes something, or just tells you to, that this project sucks. That's still adoption somewhat, because they've at least had interest enough to look at your code. And it's, that's kind of what adoption is. I'm not talking about tons of adoption yet. I'm just talking about just the basic amount of adoption. Just someone that actually finds your code out of interest and uses it. Which leads to the next type of category, which is the gold standard project. The gold standard project does not have to be the one that has the most users. It does not have to be the best solution for a problem. It has to be the solution that is adopted by the community. So if I were to ask everyone here, what is the most famous networking library on iOS? Alamo Fire, AF networking, same thing, right? That is a gold standard solution. So when I say gold standard, that's what I want you to think about. And Hyperscale is essentially a project where it doesn't have to be the gold standard, but there are actually people who work on this project that get paid to work on it full time. So if you think about Swift, right? Apple pays engineers to work on Swift full time. If you think about Ubuntu, Canonical pays engineers to work on Ubuntu full time. And they work on open source full time. They manage pull requests, they manage issues, they manage the community. And that's kind of the biggest type of open source project there is. So I've had the opportunity to either work, own, or contribute to every type of project on this list. And I'll spend the next few slides going over examples of this. So I want to talk about my first project, but to do that I want to go back into the past slowly, step by step. So I want to go to a time before everyone was building JSON parsing libraries, and I've listed a few famous ones over here. I want to go a little farther back to auto layout libraries. This is going back to like 2015 at this point. And then I want to go back to like 2009 to like asynchronous image downloading libraries, or 2010 when GCD, Grand Central Dispatch, was released by Apple. And everyone decided to build their own asynchronous image downloading libraries, myself included. The 2 libraries that I mentioned here are, in my opinion, the 2 best ones. Kingfisher is something that came out 2-3 years ago. It's a fully Swift repository. SD-WebImage came out a decade ago. It's an Objective-C, and it still works perfectly. So I didn't build a JSON parsing library or an auto layout library or an asynchronous image downloading library. So take a moment, think about what existed back in 2010 and 11 in your head, what kind of open source libraries I potentially could have built, and just put something in your mind, okay? What I built was a pull to refresh library, which may seem crazy because now it's just built into iOS, especially as iOS 6. Did anyone guess pull to refresh? I didn't think so. No one ever guesses it, which is perfect. So does anyone know the story behind pull to refresh? It's a very interesting story. Okay, I hear most people going no. All right, so the story is as follows. Lauren Brichter created Tweety, which was the first iOS client and Mac OS client in 2007 or 8. And Tweety 2 introduced the pull to refresh gesture. And then Twitter acquired Lauren Brichter and Tweety. They turned Tweety into the first iOS app, the first Twitter iOS app, because he was the lead developer on that project. And then they patented in the US pull to refresh, the actual gesture. And then they open sourced the patent, saying we are never going to sue anyone for using open source, for using the pull to refresh patent, so everyone can have it. And that's why the next year, in 2012 or 2013, the Apple and Google added pull to refresh into their SDKs. It came out in iOS 6 with Apple. So you might be thinking to yourself, especially like last time I'm going to ask you, show of hands, how many of you have been doing iOS or Mac OS development since like 2010 or 11? Okay, so maybe a few of you will remember this. there used to be a very popular library out there that built pull to refresh in for you. It was called 320. Okay. It was by Facebook. And as Facebook gives things, and we know this week, Facebook takes things away. So Facebook deprecated 320 in 2012 or 2013. Sorry. Just wanted to cough. And this library didn't only add pull to refresh, it added a bunch of other UI views and gestures and utilities that just didn't exist in iOS. And most of this exists these days, or is built in, or you can just, it had collection views before collection views existed. Anyway, Facebook decided to deprecate this. I think it's because they were going to a hybrid interface, or a hybrid approach. So they decided to deprecate it. And at the time, I was working on two projects, one for Porsche and one for Bugatti. It was two social network apps that were based off the same white label framework. And they had a lot of, they had 9 main screens, of which 6 had table views, and we needed pull to refresh. But we needed a special type of pull to refresh, and no one really had a library online to do it. So I found one that was kind of close, and I decided to take, open source. I decided to learn how to fork code, easy, you push a button, fork the library, and started learning how you deal with scroll views and table views. And I should preface this by saying this was in early 2012. I only started doing iOS development in 2011, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I was really excited to kind of build my own library at the time. So I decided to build my own library to do all this pull to refresh stuff, and it felt really cool for 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is that I realized we're like mathematicians, lawyers, and blacksmiths, right? If I have a problem, I can build the solution myself without anyone's permission, without finding the right tools, anything like that. I can just do it myself, which feels very empowering, very awesome, especially for someone who's not a programmer working as a programmer. I felt like a charlatan, like a fake. And to be able to do this myself kind of empowered me. And the other thing that it gave me was gumption. That's not a common English word, so I gave you the 2 closest Russian words that mean gumption. And what's important about this is I was working for an agency called Fueled at the time, which gave me the ability to work on these Ducati and Porsche projects. And I was the most junior developer on the team, and the day that we found out that 320 was getting deprecated, a lot of people started freaking out because no one at the company at the time wanted to or knew, knew how to build a pull to refresh library. So I decided I'm going to learn how to do it over the weekend. I did it over the weekend. I came to the office on Monday. I said, hey, I built the solution. No one has to worry about it. And they got really excited because I took the time out of my day to, I've been talking too much over the last couple of days. They just got excited because I took the initiative. And you take the initiative, and I felt confident, and I just decided to go out of my way to do it. And I gained confidence because my bosses were excited that we have this developer who just doesn't care to listen to rules. He just does what he wants because he knows it's the right thing to do for the company. And it gave me a lot more confidence and opened up the doors between this and realizing I can build my own solutions for in open source whenever I have problems and give it to other people in case they're interested. Those 2 things combined started me on this track to doing a lot more open source development. So those are the first 2 lessons, and there's a few of these scattered, first 3 rather. There's a few of these scattered throughout the talk. So the next thing I want to talk to is another project I worked on called the float label pattern. I'm assuming at some point in your life everyone has seen this. If not, the way this pattern works is you have a text field or a text view. You have text that you type in, and the placeholder label flies up above the text. It's a simple animation to do. But there was no real, there was only one real implementation of it and didn't exactly work the way I wanted it to work when it came out. So this pattern came out by a guy named Matt Smith in Atlanta, Georgia in 2013. And I decided that I wanted to do my own implementation. So in Objective-C, I started building my own. And the one thing I wanted to do there's many things I wanted to do. The one thing I wanted to do that this library didn't do, the original one that came out, JV float label text field, is if you watch at the very end, you'll see the text animates away 1 letter at a time. See? Cool. I wanted to know how to do that, so I swizzled UI text field's clear button. I'd never swizzled in my life at this point. I barely had an idea what that was. I didn't exactly know how to do it. So for those of you here, what is swizzling? Swizzling is the idea of taking an implementation and hot swapping it for another implementation at runtime. And the idea is you only have to do this with SDKs which you don't have access to the implementation. i.e. UIKit is an example, right? You don't know how things work, you just have the interface. So I'm assuming some of you still remember how to read Objective-C. So the idea here is very basic. What you need to do, and there's only one real magic piece, is you have to figure out what the name of the clear button is in UI text field to be able to change the implementation of what happens. And so what I did here is I used the obvious thought was a camel-cased version of the word clear button, and that worked. I was able to get a selector instance. From the selector, you get the implementation of the button. From there, you use a function pointer. All of these things, by the way, I had no idea what any of this meant at the time. I had to just read and learn, and there's a lesson to come out of this. So I learned how to do all of this, and then after I got the implementation, I got access to the button. I saved that button into a new local IVAR, and then from there, I swapped the implementation, and in the process, I learned how you can move all targets and actions for all control events, something I'd never have to do, but now I know how to do it. So I learned a lot of these new techniques, especially because afterwards I needed to swizzle all the time. I always found reasons to swizzle. So this was cool because now I was able to add this animation into a UI text field. And this library is available online if you want to take a look at how I did it. It's UI float label text field. And now you'll be able to do it yourself. And you'll learn a bunch of different things if you want to learn how to do it. So this is something I learned in Objective-C because it's like a trick that I learned that I never would have learned if I didn't try to want to build something. I didn't need this, I just wanted to build it, and because of it I learned a lot. Same goes true with experimenting with something I wanted to do is I wanted to also build a library in Swift around string. This is before Swift 4 came out. And I wanted to add a bunch of functionality that would be needed for server-side Swift. So I looked at a few libraries in other communities, like Voca.js is a JavaScript library. It's very famous for string manipulation. And what I did is I started implementing all these functions myself. So in the process, I learned about aspects of the Swift API that I never would have had to use anywhere else in my life if it wasn't open source code, and if it wasn't trying to target multiple platforms, and if it wasn't trying to manipulate strings, which I don't need to do on a daily basis. So things that I learned: discardable result, one of the coolest attributes that exists. So if you ever get this compiler warning when you're trying to, so let's say you're in the following situation. Here I have a string function called Latinized, which takes characters from all different languages and converts their glyphs into Latin glyphs and then removes all the accents, right? So in this case, I'm using the word hello in a few different languages. So what discardable result does is, let's say I don't want to save that value, right? If I don't save that value, the compiler usually complains, and it says you have to do underscore equals the name of the function, right? Everyone has seen this at some point. What discardable result does, it says, don't show a warning. The user knows what they're doing. They know that there are situations where this function needs to return a type, and there are times where the user doesn't care to actually retain that value. So it'll get rid of the compiler warning for you. So that's the first thing I learned. The next thing I learned is how to target Linux versus iOS versus Mac OS. Also, I learned how to target PS4. Didn't know you could target PS4. Apparently, you could target PS4s. And that's using the OS macro. Not a macro, I guess an attribute if you want to call it that. And then there's the availability clause, which you use all the time. If you work, anyone here works for an agency, which I'm sure many of you have at some point, you have to sometimes target APIs between different versions of iOS, Mac OS, tvOS, and so on. So you learn how to do that. And then I learned about the applying transform function, which does all the magic of converting one set of glyphs to another set of glyphs using core text, I think, pretty sure. And then assertion failures, which are just asserts with messages, so just another API that you only use to have a message pop up in debug mode. So all of these things, some of this I knew, but not all of these things I learned in the process because I was trying to build something that I thought was interesting. And these are APIs that I learned about in the process. And I feel like I became a better developer a little bit because I started exploring parts of Swift and other places which I would never have experimented with otherwise. So what's the lesson here? The lesson here is you learn and experiment with language and platform APIs that you wouldn't normally do in your day job. So there's a corollary here. I understand everyone here is busy. Everyone here has their own jobs, families. So working on open source happens to be more of a privilege than the ability to do it. But if you do find the time and you are interested in learning things, you don't know what you want to learn, pick an idea, pick a project, and jump into it. You'll definitely, I guarantee you, learn something in the process. So this is lesson number 4. So Next, I want to talk about gold standard projects. So the reason I have so many stars on GitHub, and the reason I have my code is probably I know that these libraries are in a lot of important applications, is because of these two libraries that I built, Harpy and Siren. I don't know if any of you have actually used it or heard of it. Maybe you have. Great. If not, you'll learn about it. If you have, come talk to me afterwards. Harpy and Siren, what they do is when there is a Harpy is an Objective-C, Siren is in Swift. What these libraries do is when a new version of your update is available on the App Store, there's some piece of JSON that gets stored in the iTunes API that you can ping and you get a bunch of information out of. One of those things is what's the new version, when did it come out, what versions of the library, what devices is it compatible with, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can conditionally, with Harpy and Siren, present localized messages to the end user and get analytics about how they interact with these alerts. And this game in the background is it's the first game the Washington Post ever released. It's called Floppy Candidate. We built it for the 2016 election, where people would play Flappy Bird with Trump and Clinton and everyone else's heads, so their heads would bounce up and down. Unfortunately, we had to take this game out of the App Store recently because we didn't want to support it anymore, but if you can find videos online of how ridiculous this game looks. So I got to put this library in there because I know we were going to be shooting updates out all the time, and it was cool. It worked. I remember looking at the analytics. When I turned this alert on, because I controlled it through a remote config, our adoption rate went from when we usually wait 1 day. So usually once users start updating the app, once it goes live, we wait about a day before we turn on this feature. We turn on the config that turns this alert on, and at that point in time, I saw that after about 2 days, 97% of our users were on the latest version of the app, which was awesome. We didn't have to worry about backwards compatibility support because it's only 3% of people at that point. So what did I learn building two really big libraries in the iOS community? First, I learned about package managers, because if you want people to use your project, you have to learn about package managers. So I built Harpy in 2012. The CocoaPods came out in 2013. In the beginning of 2013, at least that's when it started getting steam. So I started getting issues and pull requests saying, hey, can you add pod support? And then a year later, or 2 years later, I got a request for Carthage support. So I added Carthage support. And then no one asked me for Swift Package Manager support, but I added Swift Package Manager support anyway, just because I figure at some point in the future it's going to be a dependency manager people will use. But there's a lot of things you have to learn about working with 3 package managers. They all are very opinionated. So here's a tip for you if you ever decide to build a new open source project. First, build your project and target a Swift Package Manager, because Swift Package Manager, at least as of now, or last time I checked, which was earlier this year, it requires that all of your source file live at the top level directory in a folder called sources, for whatever reason. Then, Carthage requires that you have a sample project with a dynamic library linked with all your files in there, and that dynamic library has to have its own scheme that is shared and uploaded to GitHub. So that's why it's very opinionated, extremely opinionated library. And then CocoaPods doesn't care about anything. It just says, give me a pod spec file, show me where all the files and bundles and resources are, and everything's good to go. So that's kind of how the order I would do it in. Swift Package Manager, Carthage, and then CocoaPods. I also learned about continuous integration, right? I was never really big into testing. Again, self-taught, working at startups. No idea what CI was, didn't really care about unit testing, but when you have a big project online and you want people to use it, they want to make sure that it's well tested. So I have a couple hundred tests across, at least I think I have a couple hundred tests, and I use BuddyBuild. And I love BuddyBuild for different reasons we can talk to after this in case you're interested in a new CI tool in the background. But I learned how to use Travis CI, I learned how to write YAML files, I started writing pre and post install shell scripts, which is cool because I wasn't just doing Objective-C or Swift anymore. I was starting to expand my horizons. And it was nice, especially as I said, I'm someone who didn't have to do this before. I came from a different career. So jumping into other parts of development started to make me feel more robust. And I started feeling more confident in my skill set. I knew how process should work properly in a development workflow. The next thing I learned, and this is useful for, I guess, most of you, because you probably have had to do this because you are not from an English-speaking country by default. I am, and I'm very privileged where most of the apps I launch are in the American App Store, and then I don't really care much, or at least I'm not really told to care too much about who downloads my apps everywhere else, because most of them are for the English-speaking world. So I learned how to localize and internationalize, and I added NS localized strings everywhere. I have custom bundles. Harpy and Siren are now work with like 42 languages or something, every version of Chinese, every version of Portuguese, a couple different Spanish, Russian, Ukrainian. They work with every language that I've had people submit pull requests from, which is cool to see that this library is at least used in 40 different locales. And I also learned how to override iOS system level localization. So even if a device forcefully shoots out all text in like a Chinese, there's some code that I added that'll allow you to override that and shoot the message out in English or French if you want for your specific purposes. I had to deal with otherwise. And then I learned a very important trick is what it's like to become a maintainer versus becoming a consumer. I've used Harpy on maybe 10 projects, and Siren as well. But when I look at my statistics from CocoaPods, at least over the last couple months, Harpy and Siren combined get around 80,000 downloads. Other people use this project more than I do. So what happens when you no longer become the number one maintainer of a project? You become the number one consumer. Well, you start thinking about the project more from a management perspective. How do you deal with it? How do you deal with pull requests? How do you deal with issues? How do you deal with feature requests? What is the actual vision of this project now that other people want to add a lot of other things? How do you learn to say no to people without hurting their feelings online? Because, on the internet, everything's that, well, I'm not really anonymous on the internet, but you still don't want to hurt other people's feelings when they have what they think is a great idea. And I'll tell you, the worst thing is someone, without asking, decides to go build out a crazy feature suite, opens up a pull request and says, hey, I think this feature is going to be awesome, yada, yada, yada. And I look at it and I'm like, wow, this is absolute shit. And it's written like garbage. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I don't think this fits in the vision right now. You feel free to fork the repository, launch it, do whatever you want. This is open source software. God bless. That's how you say no. But you have to do it. You have to do it sometimes because you don't want to muddy up your code with other people's ideas if you don't believe in those ideas or if you don't believe in their implementation. And here's another thing. Let's say someone wrote a good feature, but they wrote code horribly. What do? You merge their code base because they're probably not going to rewrite it. They're not going to write the way you want to write it, right? You merge their code base, but before you do that, you create another branch forked off their code base that automatically fixes everything and styles it. So you merge theirs into develop or master, whatever branching system you use, and then you override it with the version that you've already fixed, and then you release a new version of your app. So they still get the credit for writing the feature. GitHub still keeps the attribution. But then it actually looks the way it looks. It looks proper because it looks the way you as a developer want it to look. So the lesson here is maintaining open source projects is very rewarding, but it's also a job that you don't get paid to do. The only thing you get paid to do is in downloads and in GitHub stars and in forks and in tweets, and that's about it. And then sometimes you get to come speak at a conference. And that's about as far as this goes. But it's fun, especially because your code now gets to hit many, many more people. More people than you would ever hit because you're hitting other regions and other worlds. Not other worlds. No one's on Mars yet. You're hitting other parts of the world, which is cool because other people start using your code that they never would have. And that, to me, is a really cool feeling. So that's kind of how I got into open source. I know I spent like 20 minutes on that and what I learned. But let's talk about how you can get into open source and how you can contribute, because maybe now you're slightly interested on getting into this, I hope. So how do you contribute? Well, let's talk about how to contribute to Swift. There's only two things you really need to do. One is you go to bugs.swift.org, which is a public Jira instance, and you filter the results for starter bug and open. Those are usually results, those are issues that have already been filtered by the Apple Swift community and are bugs that they will take outside of the Swift 4 or Swift 5 scope of work. And those are starter bugs, meaning that if you know a little bit of C or C++ or Swift, it doesn't matter, there's work to be done in all three, you can contribute. Or you can do what I did, which is comb the code base, and then once you're combing the code base, you will find something called NS unimplemented or fix me unsupported, which is code words for help, we're too busy or lazy to do this ourselves, do it yourself. This is how I contributed to Swift. I was looking for a very specific testing function that existed in Objective-C that did not exist in Swift, which was XCT assert no throw, which is an exception handling function. What this function does is it checks to see if a try function or throwing function throws, and if it's not supposed to throw and it does, an assert is raised. So my contribution to Swift 3.1 was adding this functionality back into Swift. So I added to SwiftLib's corelibs xctest and to Swift proper, so it's available on Linux and it's available on all the Darwin platforms. And I did it because I saw an NS unimplemented in there, I think. So what I did is I opened up an issue saying, hey, I want to implement this function. Is this okay? Can I do this? First of all, I first asked them the question because I've learned from being an open source developer, no one really wants you to go do something without asking permission sometimes because then you're wasting everyone's time, especially yours. And they said, yeah, sure, we haven't gotten to this. Please go ahead and add it. And they pointed me the docs, which were poorly written at the time. So I ended up spending like, I don't know, I think I would spend 7 days every single night for 7 days working with Robert Wiedemeyer at Codify on Twitter and someone else, getting this implemented. If you look at the issues, I have maybe like 100 deep, 2 or 3 different threads with 100 comments deep. I couldn't get their testing infrastructure working. They used a system called Ninja to get their test harness up and running. I learned pretty much how Swift operates, and it's totally different than any other open source platform ever used. They have their own internal testing robot that they control. Swift takes about 2 hours to compile and run every single time, and I feel like they only have 2 or 3 instances running at the same time. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. We could talk afterwards if you're interested. But the point is, I contributed to Swift. It was a pain in the ass. It's still going to be a pain in the ass if you want to contribute. But here's a starter guide on how you can get started contributing to Swift. And if you write tests, great. And if you ever decide to write a test with XCT assert no throw, I hope you think of me. Next, you can also contribute to established projects outside of Swift. So this project is free time. It's now called GitHawk by Ryan Nystrom, an engineer at Instagram. What he did is he created a project in the open right away. And in this project, he's asked for help from many other people. And here he wrote some sample issues, and he tagged them with wishlist or feature or starter bugs. And this is an example of how you can contribute to another person's project. Just look for labels. Look for a project that you like that's in the open, GitHawk or free time as an example, and just start leaving comments on the issues and PRs, and people will usually love to accept your help. Then, as another example, same exact thing, look at the labels, there's SwiftLint. So there's a feature that I want in SwiftLint. SwiftLint is a linter that allows you to lint your code, but your Swift code, obviously based on the name. And a linter usually just checks to make sure that everything is written to standards. And this uses a mixture of the GitHub and Ray Wenderlich standards plus a few custom ones. And it's all controlled by a YAML file. So there is a rule that I wanted that will automatically throw a warning whenever someone marks a function as throws or rethrows, and that function never actually throws. So I built the rule using examples because their documentation wasn't that good either. But they didn't like the implementation because the implementation seemed to be fairly slow because it was using regex. And I had like 9 or 10 different things you had to regex for. And they're like, this is too slow. We don't want to do regex anymore. We're moving away from regex solutions. So I never finished this. The PR is still open. If you want to contribute to open source right now, go to SwiftLint issue 1315 and feel free to take over because I don't know if I'm ever going to get to it. Every time I give this talk, I say the same thing. And the last time I gave this talk was 3 months ago, and I still haven't even opened that PR. So I have a feeling I'm never going to get to it. But if you want to contribute, you can start where I left off. Now you can get on to creating your own project. It's actually a pain in the butt to start creating your own project these days. You need because if you want it to be people to read it, people are going to start looking for a README. And after a README, they're going to look to make sure that every line of public code is documented and that some private code is documented, right? I'm in the camp of people that believe that code should be self-documenting, right? You don't always have to write documentation, but if you want someone to contribute to your project, they have to understand what you want, so you have to leave comments on private and file private code. A documentation website, there's a cool little project called Jazzy by Realm that allow you to do this. Make sure to hook up to continuous integration. Travis and BuddyBuild allow you to have one concurrent open source project running at any point in time. So free CI, which is awesome. Create a vision document. I don't do this because I usually build small projects. But if you have a really big project and you want to build it in pieces, build a vision document, vision.md, a markdown file, and then add issues with tags saying these are future features, and then label the ones other people can work on that you don't want to work on because you want to get buy-in from other people. The next thing you want to do is you want to market your library, right? How do you get stars and forks and love and tweets is you have to go out and you don't have to beg, but you have to email everyone and send messages. So I have been lucky to be part of each one of these libraries more than once, one mailing lists. iOS Dev Weekly by Dave Verwer and company, he has other people writing it, and This Week in Swift by Natasha the Robot. And iOS Goodies have been the best 3 to get my libraries out there. I would recommend that you do that. And what happens when you get all the mailing links to sync up within a few days? Well, you end up becoming the top trending library on Swift in open source, or you become the top trending developer, or top 3 or top 5 in Swift for a few days. So this happened when I released Guitar, which is my least used, simplest library, but because I just put a huge marketing push behind it, meaning I emailed a lot of people, say, hey, I wrote this cool library, maybe some people are going to be interested, no one is interested. But still, it was kind of cool to see my name written there on those top lists. And what else happens when people find out about your libraries? Big companies start using your libraries. So there's this company called AppSite that works with CocoaPods that will tell you which of your apps use your library. So I found out Giphy, which has over 100 million downloads, has Harpy installed. I found out Air India used my code. At some point, Playboy used my code. The London Games used my code. Macworld, Gap, the Globe and Mail. I work on a bunch of apps at the Washington Post. They use my code. So I've hit, at some point, just with Giphy alone, my code has hit over 100 million people. That's a huge chunk of the world, which felt crazy when I found that out. And I only found that out recently. So this is like the benefit of open source code. Your code may end up in a huge project, and many people may use it, which again is, you feel good because you're helping other people, which not reinvent the wheel, solve a problem, and then a lot of other people experience it. But there's something else that you could do. You guys are from Ukraine, some of you from Kyiv. You can talk to Lisa. She's one of the best growth hackers I've ever come across. And she's probably, yeah, there she is, standing in the back. So she's a growth hacker. Obviously everyone knows her. She works for Flawless. They have this, if you ever follow her, I get maybe a whole digest of 20 or 30 tweets and other messages a day about awesome other people that are doing awesome other things in the Swift and iOS and the macOS communities. And they're retweeting and reblogging other people's work. So she is someone that can get you jump-started, especially because she lives here and she can help you out. So again, you have your own local growth hacker that can help you out. So from there, let's go into maintenance tips and tricks. There's a few things you can do to make your life easier because again, as I said earlier, and I think lesson number 5, this is a job. So you can create templates. So templates are files that live, issue templates appear. Pull request templates are files that live in your GitHub repository in a hidden folder called .github, and they automatically, whenever a user opens up a new issue or new pull request, it automatically populates some text saying, hey, don't open a new issue if you're having problem A, B, C, or D. So I used to have people that opened up the same issue over and over again about localization. I don't remember what it was. So at one point, I just said, I fixed this issue so many times already. It's fixed. I documented. You're just missing the information. Read the pull request log. I think that's what it was. It might be something else. Just go to this specific issue, or here's how you handle this problem, or here's what you did wrong in the configuration step. Same thing with pull requests. So this will save you a lot of time and a heartache answering the same question over and over again. Then, if you don't even want to deal with people, you can just turn off issues altogether. GitHub allows you to turn off issues. What's the benefit of doing that? Well, it only allows people to communicate with you through GitHub using pull requests, which means that the people have at the very least learned how to fork a project, they've learned to read the manual, they've actually provided some sample code, and they've attempted to fix a bug if it's a bug. So these people actually already invested in getting this project to be better. So if you turn on issues, you filter out 90% of the people that you'll try to communicate with. I personally don't want to do this because I have had some interesting conversations with people who just have interesting questions or interesting feature requests. So I've always decided to just leave issues open and deal with those problems. And then I have my own rule called the 5-day rule. So if someone opens up an issue or a pull request and I have a question and I respond, and they don't respond to me within 5 work days, I just close it and I don't think about it anymore. And if they're interested, they'll open it again. No one has ever reopened it. That means someone just wanted to say, hey, here's my idea, good luck. Or here's my sample code, enjoy. As if I should be grateful for them, for now spending my own time trying to understand what they wanted to do and never coming back and talking it through me. So I decided after a while of waiting on people that I don't want to work, I live with to-do lists. I'm like, I don't want this on my to-do list for so long. After 5 days, it disappears. And this has been very helpful for me, keeping my sanity. And now there's also, Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, and he also created Git. He has this thing called a network of trust. There's a great video that I link off to that was with TechCrunch in 2014, where he talks about how the Linux repository works. He doesn't look at every line of code. He has people he trusts who look and merge at every line of code, because if he had to review every single line of code, Linux would never ever release. It would take years for each release, but now they have a release every 3 months, I think, is what he said, because he has 100 people or so that he trusts that merge everything in, and we have CI, he has an infrastructure in place that makes sure nothing regresses, or nothing bad regresses. So trust people. I trust people for Siren. I have a guy who I've never met, I've only talked to through text messages, who helped me get started on the Swift version of Harpy, so Siren. And then I have a guy who added a feature in Guitar who just wanted to work on open source. So him and I talk these two people and I, we talk all the time, but they have access to these repositories. They can push it, they can delete the repository if they want, but they don't. We have this network of trust. And then you can deprecate a project. Sometimes you're like, no one's using this, I don't want to support it, I don't want to have to update it to the next version of Swift every year. What do? You can do what Google did with 320, which is you can just add a README, and on the README, you just you remove the code base in that commit as well and say, hey, we're no longer supporting it because XYZ. But if you want to use it, just go back to this commit and you can download the last version of the code base. That's one way to deprecate a project. Another one is just to give it to the community. So if any of you have ever used JSQ Messages View Controller, Jesse Squires, who now works at PlanGrid, used to work at Instagram, another big open source guy, he also was on the Swift Unwrapped podcast, right? That's the other thing that he does. He gave it to the community and they created MessageKit, which is a Swift version of JSQ Messages View Controller, which was an Objective-C library that imitated the Messages app, all the entire chat flow. And now it's up and running. So he wrote a blog post. People are like, oh my God, I have businesses that run on this code base. How can you do this? And people are like, don't worry, we'll take over it. Now it's community driven. And I think they already had 1 or 2 releases since this happened 6 months ago. And then I just want to give you some final words of advice, things that have helped me. And these come from books. I love to read. I actually like to listen to books, but sometimes I read them too. So the first one comes from an American show called The Shark Tank. Have any of you heard of it? Okay, so Shark Tank is a show where a bunch of investors go on the show, and people like you and me who have ideas, usually not software ideas, we come and we pitch the product, and then we have to have we have to know all our numbers, who our customers are, why we need money, and then they make deals with us where they take anywhere from 5 to 25 or 30% of the company, and they give us money right away, and then they help our product succeed. And you get all the viewership, you get all the benefits of people on TV watching this, which is millions of people. So it's like an instant hit. Your product sometimes becomes an instant hit, or right away you're told that you're an idiot and no one ever buys your product and your idea dies. But if it's successful, people give you money. So Shark Tank has it's like a rolling group of like 10 investors. One of these investors, his name is Damon John. He runs a company called Fubu. It's a clothing company. It stands for Us, By Us. And he wrote a book called The Power of Broke. I'm not going to go into what The Power of Broke is, but at the end of the book, he puts together a list of his power principles, like a summary of like 12 principles. I think it's 12. And this one is Broke Power Principle number 4. So understand that you will be rewarded for solving other people's problems or filling holes in the marketplace, just as you will be rewarded for helping others reach their desired objectives. In other words, if you can figure out how to do something better, faster, easier, and more efficiently than anybody else, and if you can make somebody else's life a little smoother in the bargain, you're way ahead of the game. In the idea from a business, if you do something before someone else does it, if you're first to market, or if you do something simpler than someone else does it, you'll be rewarded financially, right? But in the mindset of open source, if you do something more efficiently or correctly or simply, you will become the best gold standard project. So with respect to 2 of my libraries, like I said, Harpy and Siren, I was not the first to market with those. I was the 3rd to market, but they're the only 2 that still exist, still are active, and still committed on, and still get a lot of use across the entire app spectrum. So I've succeeded in that regard because I did something more efficiently, even though I wasn't first to market. And then there's these 2 books about something called The Law of Attraction. One is called The Alchemist, and one is called The Secret. The Alchemist is a book on it's a story, it's a fictional story, and The Secret is just an explanation of this thing called The Secret, the law of attraction. If you want something, you think about it, your brain will start working differently. You'll start making decisions in your daily life, small ones, that help you get into the mindset of doing this. So my biggest problem, I'll give you an example of what I did in my life. My degrees are in physics. I'm not computer science. I did a bunch of stuff when I was, I'm completely self-taught. And I wanted to be successful. My goal in life was to get a lot of people to use my code. And at some point I learned about how open source works, and I'm like, well, to achieve this goal I need to start writing more code, giving it away for free, and one project led to the next, and one project led to a job, and a job led to meeting the right people, and I started snowballing, the effect started snowballing, and today I find myself sitting in Ukraine talking to all of you about this, which I never would have happened if I never did any of this stuff. And it's because I've had this mindset that I want to succeed doing open source. And it's a single mindset. It's become a major part of one of my major hobbies over the last 5 years is just to write code for free or contribute to other projects or to help other people. And because of this, you know, this secret, the law of attraction, wanting this work, I attracted this type of benefits to me, including in my work life and in other aspects of my life. So I would recommend if you want to read a couple good books or you want to change how you approach the world, you not like self-help books, but like you're interested in thinking differently, try one of these two books out. And then I want to leave you off with one comment, my favorite XKCD comic, which is the following. On the left it says, "Never have I felt so close to another soul and yet so helplessly alone as when I Google an error and there's one result, a thread by someone with the same problem and no answer, last posted to in 2003. Where are you, Denver Coder 9? What did you see?" I'm sure everyone has come across a problem, and there's only one question on Stack Overflow with absolutely no answer. It's like 6 years old at this point. And you're like, I still have this problem. What do you do? If you end up finding the solution, please, for the love of God, write the solution down. Not for you, not for the guy who doesn't care about this problem, hopefully after 6 years, but for the person, unfortunate soul, who's going to come across this problem again in 6 years, or in this case, in 14 years. Do you imagine a software problem that goes unsolved for 28 years? How crazy that sounds? It's probably going to happen at some point, especially because there are parts of the SDKs that we use that get overlooked eventually. So what I would recommend, help other people out. Pay it forward. You'll be a good citizen of the world if you do that. Thank you.
Thank you. It was awesome. So now you know how to start contributing to open source projects, right? And what is more important, how to deprecate your project when you feel enough. Do we have any questions? By the way,
okay? So about that clear button in that library,
sure.
Don't you get rejected from App Store by just blindly using some property you don't know the name?
No, swizzling is okay.
And that selector thing is okay too, right?
Yeah, I have never gotten rejected for this.
Okay.
This API, because these are public APIs. The selected for string is a public API.
Well, selector is public API,
right.
But clear button isn't.
They don't, okay, here's why you don't get rejected. Their tools don't catch it.
Okay.
You're not technically breaking the law if no one knows how to check for that law, right?
Well, but if you selector for something, you can be rejected.
You can, but it hasn't happened.
Okay.
I'm just curious. I'm just curious. How many of you still use swizzling? That's for me. It's something old school, Objective-C kind of thing.
To answer that, I still do it, and I still do it in Swift, but very rarely. I have to do it sometimes. Yeah, we had to do it a couple times at the post.
You should talk next time about swizzling on Swift.
Yeah, we'll definitely do.
Just another question out of curiosity. How many of you still use Objective-C?
Boy.
A half. How many of you use Swift only? And who are those poor people who combine Swift and Objective-C in their project? Oh my god. I will hug you all. Okay, any more questions? I see we have one question. We can have at least several more. Do we have any more questions? Yeah, I see a hand. Please.
Which one first?
Sorry. This was the first one. Okay, sorry.
Okay, so do you have any advices how to find the time to combine your daily job, your family life, and contributing to open source?
100%. My company's policy is they want to keep our engineers happy. So in Washington, D.C., we don't have a huge amount of iOS engineers, surprisingly. They're all in New York and San Francisco. So at least the company I work for, their policy is, if you want to open source something under your own name, that's fine, even if you use company time to do it. Here's a trick, though, to get around it, in case you don't have this policy. Start thinking about this problem and working towards this problem if it's something that your work needs, but then Saturday night rolls around, don't go to the bar. Sit down in front of your computer and start coding away. Lose a little bit of sleep. Maybe if you have a baby like I do at home, maybe the baby will wake you up and like, well, I can't go back to sleep. You can go back in coding again. And you'll get it done. The idea is you have to give something else up. I usually give up sleep. It's on you. Everyone has the same 24 hours in a day. It's not the best advice in the world, but I'm not going to lie to you. If you can't do it at work, you have to lose sleep at some point. Sorry.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
To be honest, the same story is with me, like just no sleep. The secret is no sleep.
Yeah.
Okay, the third question from the side. Yeah, please.
Yeah, hello. As I remember, you say nothing about license texts. So, situation about your own project, you have done a lot of commits and, I don't know, for half a year. And the situation, you say, hey, I have no any licenses, or my current license is not that I want. What to do in this situation?
Sorry, what do you mean by listens?
License.
License. So can you say it one more time then? Because I didn't completely understand the question.
Okay. At some moment, you decide to change your current license, or in situation you don't even have any license
Like
before.
MIT license
Yeah.
you're talking about? Like,
Yeah.
Okay.
So what to do in this situation?
If you want to change your
is
license?
it okay?
Yeah, of course. You just. I've never had to deal with this because I don't care much for copyright or copyleft code. When I put something in the open, I don't care about the details. But in your specific scenario, I would write in the README saying, hey, versions 1 through 3 are under MIT, versions 3.1 onwards are under FreeBSD license, and just change the license file, deprecate the other one, or if it's such a big problem, fork your own library, rename it, deprecate one, and then start a new one with a new license. That's usually what I think people have done, especially when projects get acquired. I think that's what people have done. They just changed the names. Though, if you look at a project like Fastlane, Fastlane's always existed under Fastlane, right? All they did was consolidate all their code for other reasons, into one project versus many distributed projects. But But if they changed their license, they just changed it in there and didn't say anything. The idea here is it's very, very hard to break an open source license. You have to be a real asshole to somehow break an open source license because they're very permissive. And to be an asshole, and I'm sorry, that's the only way you can define it, is you just have to remove the person's name who created the project from your source file, which no one will ever really look at unless they're trying to figure out who to yell at for writing a bad API, right? You'll never ever look at who wrote a specific project, and who wrote it. So I wouldn't worry about it. I would use the same project and replace one license file for another, and then don't worry about it.
Okay, thanks.
Of course.
Great.
Thank you.
And how do you handle updates for new versions of Swift? As a owner of a library and as a
Can I open up Safari real quick? Or would you already... Yeah, you removed me. It's fine. Don't worry about it. So what I do... So right now all my libraries support Swift 2, 3.1, 3.2, and 4. I do the following. Whenever a new version of Swift comes out, when I create a new release, I make sure that the latest previous version, so Swift 3.1 or 2 or whatever, they're more or less the same, is I commit the code in that version, I branch it off into a separate branch, and then the master branch or the develop branch, whichever is your mainline branch, points to the newest version. And then in the README near the top, I say this code base supports 4, 3.2, 3.1, but only 4 gets updates moving forward. If there's any problems with the other branches, fix it yourself. Because again, it's a job, and it's a job that I only want to do to a certain degree, and I don't want to support old versions of Swift. That's my specific thoughts on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's wrap up this round of questions, okay? Do you have any more? No? Oh, okay. So we had 4 questions, but we have 3 pins. It's
Okay.
up to you to decide.
Swizzling, license. What was your question again?
Uh,
That question.
No worries, Vyacheslav, you will have your own pin. Okay, so
Exactly.
people, go to the stage to grab your pins, please. Come here, okay?
Cool.
These are wooden. Thank you for your question. These are, come here. Super nice, super wooden, super limited edition because we don't have any time. Thank you. Edition of Cocoa's Brains pins. I hope you enjoy it. No worries, we'll make them more, I believe, next time. But now it's the first edition of these pins, and we are happy to give away them to people who are curious and who are smart and who ask questions. So don't hesitate to ask questions. And we have a small gift for you,
Oh, thank you.
Arthur.
Спасибо.
Say
Appreciate it.
thank you one more time. Thank you. Great talk.